We've highlighted a number of different ways people are approaching co-housing and collective living and ownership on this channel, including what we're doing at Flock, the Eco Village at Ithaca, the Agrarian Trust, Sue's Pocket Villages, including Aurora and Amabel, and today we'll share with you yet another structure that we've only briefly discussed, which is the Community Land Trust model. We met up with Krista Nunez, director of Khuba International, to talk about the forest farm community Rhize Up Community Farm they are setting up in the town of Danby, New York. The model is still a work in progress, but as of right now, it's operating more like a community land trust, which she'll share about here.
My name is Krista Nunez, and I run a nonprofit called Khuba International, and we have a project called Quarter Acre for the People that started right after the beginning of the pandemic in a response to some of the really disturbing news we were hearing about people in inner cities and on reservations, not being able to socially distance, not being able to access healthcare, and we were like, people just need land. People who've been forced into these reservationized and urbanized situations, we need land. And so we got together and we're like, let's just buy some land. There's a group of us, some Gayacono folks and some Black folks and some Latinx folks that are collaborating on making this into an intentional farming community.
Okay, so when you say this, is this like, how did you find it? Where were you looking? Because, when we were looking even, 3 or 4 years ago, we're like, it's so sparse because everything has been kind of quarter acred up almost in a way. So.
Well, we thought Danby was really special because they've had some new ordinances around preserving some of this beautiful nature and some of the farmland and really wanting to not split everything up and develop everything into little parcels. And so we have similar goals in preserving the land and living in amongst the trees rather than clear cutting and raising everything. And so we were like, let's figure out a piece of land where we could create a forest farm, where we could grow things with what exists here and have very little pressure and kind of preserve the really beautiful, unique nature. And this is a 14-acre parcel that's obviously very heavily wooded. We all have knowledge about mushroom growing and beekeeping and orcharding and growing nut trees. So we have objectives around kind of doing a bunch of different things here.
That's cool. So is the idea to just have a farm that you come to, or is it a place that people live on and then farm, or how do you see it actually working?
You don't see that big, beautiful structure right there yet?
Take us through it. I know some of this actually, requires a lot of imagination for folks, especially when you come onto raw land and there's no infrastructure on it.
Right.
But take us through a little bit of that vision. And how many people purchased the land? Did you have to purchase it as a unit? How did you structure? I mean, these are all ideas I'd like to suss out.
That's great. My friend Davi Mosey, she's a local activist here in Ithaca. She introduced me to a man named Jeff Furman, who was one of the founders of Ben & Jerry's ice cream.
Oh, that's
he
cool.
helped Ben & Jerry put together their economic and financial structure and has been, as part of that organization, he led their foundation for a number of years, and he's local to Ithaca, and we became fast friends, both have passions around food justice and voting rights, and just this amazing person. He and his wife, Sarah Hess, are just movers and shakers in this area, and told him about this project and our goals, and he was like, let me introduce you to Jerry. See what happens. So we applied through their foundation, and lo and behold, we had this wonderful conversation, and they were like, how much you need? This piece of land, which we had seen, seemed like the perfect piece of land because, again, we don't want to expand or do anything outside of what's already allowable here. And so that would be enough to purchase the land, and then we could do further fundraising. And so that's what we did. The Ben & Jerry's Foundation granted us $30K. We purchased the land, and we are now in planning. White Hawk Eco Village is another intentional community here in Danby, and they did a community-wide fundraiser to help us be able to pay an architect and an engineer and some tree assessors and kind of figuring out what we could do. And so we're right now in the planning mode of building an intentional farming community using a really interesting model, looking at mushrooms and how mycelium grows underground. So the space will have a shared basement, but have these individual fruiting bodies above ground, and everybody will have their individual, looking at 4 homes and a gathering, a communal kitchen, eating, gathering space.
Yeah, and White Hawk Eco Village is not something that we've filmed for Flock, but they have a really interesting structure. It's kind of centered around like a circular way, and they have about 30 homes, I think it is.
Yep.
And actually during the pandemic, they had a bunch of homes available, but then had a wait list for a lot, like people were looking to kind of live in a community like that. So there's precedent here in this community, which I think is really nice, because you're not trying to like reinvent the wheel here, so to speak.
Right.
So that's awesome. So are you focused, like, is this going to be done under your nonprofit Khuba International? Is it a different nonprofit with different governance, or how is that structured?
Right now, as it stands, Khuba International, the 501c3, owns this land, and we plan to use that fundraising structure to fundraise for the building process. And then we're going to be creating a second nonprofit that will hold the land, that will have trustees of the 8 people that have been guiding this process as a steering committee within Khuba International's Quarter Acre for the People projects. So sounds really complex, but we're creating a new nonprofit that's going to hold the land, and we hope that this will be the first model among many where Khuba could fundraise for another piece of land, purchase it, develop it in harmony with nature and the ecology of the place, and then pass it on to a new group of people to have a nonprofit.
Would it be more considered maybe like a community land trust structure?
And the nonprofit would become the community land trust, but not a singular community land trust that would hold multiple pieces of land. It would be creating a nonprofit community land trust for each site.
Each one, yes, okay. So that, because then they'll have different trustees for each site with their own governance.
Exactly.
Got it, okay.
And so the idea is to diversify land holdings, making sure that the people living on the land actually have the power and agency of what happens there, not some sort of far-off octopus organization that owns a bunch of stuff.
Who's not
control.
living on the land and does not know the dynamics there. So take us through it, because you have this beautiful little tributary kind of like, what is this? What
this
tributary
is a federally protected wetland is what you're looking at.
Federally protected wetland lands.
Yes, we did. And there are some beautiful upsides to that, and there's some really
challenges.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
So initially we were thinking there's some beautiful hemlock woods. We were going to be placing some small homes in there, but the idea of having to build a driveway and then go through all of the municipal and federal regulations and the rules around building across a federally protected wetland would just take a lot of time and money, and we're like, hey, we don't have to do that. We could just use this space as exploratory community gathering. We could, take people in there, teach. We could grow some things in there, as long as we're not disturbing the soil or disturbing the waterway in any way. There's this whole little slice. It's kind of like on a map. It looks like
should we walk through it?
Yeah, we could walk it.
Like there's a little.
Yep. I believe the previous owner put this little tree stand here for hunting or whatever purposes.
It's probably great hunting land for
Yes,
sure.
it is. I just saw a buck this morning.
Oh, really?
Yes.
That's how many points?
The most economic way to home.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's really incredible.
Yes, potentially hunters with back problems.
Is that a Herman Miller up there? Like really posh hunting.
Right, yeah. So that'll probably come out, but this area here, it'll be this sort of mushroomy looking thing that has used silos as part of the building materials. We're working with Cornell architecture students and faculty, Felix Heisel in his studio and Alex Mergold and his architecture firm, developing this beautiful reused building materials and circular economy type of construction plan.
I think the design process is some of the funnest process, because it's like you could really, envision and explore it, and then you're like, and you overlay it on a map and you're like, oh my God. What do you think the time frame is for this type of stuff? Because the visioning process could take a while just alone.
So we purchased this in early 2022.
Okay.
And we thought, we'll just do this once a year. We'll just have this going once a year.
Yeah.
It's taken us 18 months to get to a place where we know who's interested in doing this development, who refining our process of making commitments around harmonious collaboration and love and respect. And so developing ourselves was really been an interesting. So now we're at the phase of we're working with architects and folks. So I feel like, looking at a timeline in my head, it would be around summer. It would be like early spring where we could break ground. We have some funds to be able to break
So spring
ground.
of 2024.
2024.
Okay, so that's soon, yeah.
That's soon. We did receive some funding from the Tompkins County Relief Fund. So the legislature granted us some funds to develop like a well and a small driveway and the septic plan. And so we'll be starting hopefully to break ground in maybe March.
How did you go through the process? Because even when, as friends, we came together, we started doing like personality tests, kind of understanding what are our greatest fears, like kind of almost like wishy-washy things that you think about.
It's important.
But the soft stuff is just as important as the hard skills and the hard, numbers and things like that. Take us through some of that process. Like, what was that like, especially if you didn't know some of the folks, maybe as well as, say, your partner or your best friend from like high school or so?
Yeah, that's a great question. We kind of now are realizing that it's not just about moving things forward in like material ways or like physical ways, but like that spiritual inner work. So we've worked with Gladys Bringman for some of the ecological business development, and we worked with Cynthia Orsi, who's a personal coach. She's amazing. She did a lot of group work with us in terms of our values and what we believe in and our purpose, like inner stuff, and how we go about connecting with each other and what are the standards that we want to kind of lay down in terms of how we work together, which was profound and very valuable. And so, we lost some members because of, the ways in which we couldn't agree to make certain commitments. And so it helped. That was hard, but that was so necessary for us to be like, this is about love. And this is about how I prioritize your needs just as much as I prioritize my needs, if not more. And if we all do that together, this is gonna be all right. We're gonna be all right. But if we can't do that, this is what's the purpose of creating an intentional community when you can't love each other.
It's best to get that out of the way in the beginning, because it could cause a scab, towards the end of it. And it's very much like a marriage. And I think there's a lot of folks who have like asked us, and I think it's apparent even just hearing you talk that you have to put in the time.
Yes.
And sometimes it's uncomfortable having to not only communicate with somebody else, but also to have to dig inside and like unmask yourself to other folks. So it could be really uncomfortable, and a lot of folks don't want to do that work, but I think a lot of folks have been interested in saying, well, how can I do this communally? How can I go into whether you want to describe it as an intentional community or not, a community with some type of value that you co-author and share together. And it just goes to show you that it's a lot of work, and you're not really sharing how the deepness of it, but you could see just from the way you're describing it that there was a lot of pain and
so much pain. I'm smiling today, but there were some times I've shed many tears. And all of us, I think, have shed many tears over the idea of some folks not being ready. Like everybody has to be ready for this. Like, this is the future. This is it. Like, we have to be able to live together and take care of each other. But
what's
like,
the time? Time is now.
Time is now. Right today. Yesterday. So yeah, that was hard. But it was really rewarding because and it also, part of that process was talking to other people who have done this. Like Jeff Furman, having lived in a commune before, and talking to other people here at Ithaca Eco Village and other places where they're like, ours didn't work because it got weird sexually, and so I would recommend you have some standards about not sleeping with each other's husbands and wives. And I was like, okay. I'm like, thank you, taking notes.
Depends on how free of a community you want. That was one that came out of the 60s.
And also today. But it's like my husband is part of this project, and so we met in a church, and we have fidelity as part of our this is you and me, there's nobody else in it. But and we assume that everybody thinks but no. So having that understanding, no judgment, but this is what this is, and so if you can make that commitment, great.
Yeah, well, that's just a really good eye opener. I mean, I think that when you look at kind of group communities or whatever, you do see the full spectrum of it. So
sure.
there's, you often get people even saying, is that a cult?
Right.
It could be cultish, I guess. So anyway, so you're thinking of like close to the road that you're going to have some of your infrastructure.
Exactly. So we'll have the living space, the building, the environment that people will be living and sleeping and gathering in here. And then all of that rest of the 13 acres will be, 13 and a half acres will be just natural exploration space. There'll be mushroom logs, there'll be trees growing, and there'll be different, there might be some chickens here. There might be some silvopasture with some sheep here.
Well, when I also think we did a nice video with Steve from Hawk Meadow Farms, and it kind of reminds me a little bit of where he's growing his shiitakes underneath like some of the hemlocks with a little bit of water.
Right.
It's kind of like the perfect dappled shade that you would need for that. So
exactly.
If you're looking at it from that perspective, it's really amazing.
Yep.
So what I'm getting from is that you're going to set the homes closer together and then have more of the open space, which I think is a bit more of like what I think Eco Village, White Hawk Village kind of does.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we're being obviously much smaller than the other Eco Villages.
Yeah.
This is only going to be 4 homes with a different, with a separate gathering.
Now, are you planning on living here? Because I know you live in another area.
Yes.
So, okay, so you would... What's your plan?
I have 3 children and a husband, so there's 5 of us.
Yeah.
These homes are planned to be around 1,000 to 1,200.
So small.
So it'll be small.
Homes, yeah.
And so I would love to.
Yeah.
And I think we could shrink down. There's no issue with that.
Depends on when your kids graduate and go off to school.
Exactly. But we are kind of looking at who and looking at sort of a group of people that already know each other as being the occupants and the member owners. So whether I fit in that or not, that's what we're going to do. And if I don't, then it'll be something else.
Yeah, okay, so no skin off your back.
Yeah, and I love living at the Learning Farm. I mean, that was our
Yeah.
first project, and it's...
And describe a little bit of the Learning Farm for folks who may not know it, because that was one of the things that, you have a background and you work with a lot of students and so explain it.
So the Learning Farm is a education, teaching, learning farm that brings children from pre-K all the way up to college level students to learn about agriculture and how to grow food for communities, how to love each other through food and land and nature. And so we had an outdoor school during the pandemic, which was really fun.
Yeah.
And now we have an after school and a summer program. And we just grow a lot of food. And we have alpacas and sheep and goats and chickens living together. And my children love it. And it's been a great way to learn ourselves. We didn't grow up farming, my husband and I. My husband grew up in New York City, and I didn't grow up farming. And so it was our experiment. Like, this seems like a dream. It seems like the vision of what we should be doing, but do we know how to do this? Can we learn? And we've been there for 6 years, and it's been the most beautiful experience.
So how many people wound up in your group? Because you said you lost some and then had some.
Right now there's 8 of us.
Oh, that's a pretty
really good.
Yeah, that feels like a nice subset of folks.
We were really focused on the idea of cultural diversity, economic diversity, age diversity. So within that group of 8, there's folks coming from a variety of different backgrounds, which has made it just this amazingly rich experience to be able to collaborate with people I would never have overlapped with necessarily. And working with Stephen Henhock and Michelle Seneca from the Gaikona Nation, like they are, we're so alike in like what we believe in and the peace that we prioritize in our lives. But like, I don't think if we weren't doing this project, I don't know if we would ever have overlapped.
Yeah,
so,
right. Now, what do people have to commit to? Because you're mentioning like people are coming from diverse economic backgrounds.
Yeah.
I mean, some of the fundraising is going to be not off the backs of others, but off the nonprofit. But what do people have to commit to this idea?
Right. I think it's a spiritual commitment to love and care. That's the priority. Like, you have to be able to work with others in a way that is uplifting. You have to give of yourself in a way that's sacrificial. And there's no financial requirement, but there's an internal commitment to give, to be a giving person, and to work on behalf of others. There's no hand over 20 grand and you can be a part of this. There's none of that. the nonprofit that I run has decided to bear the burden of the fundraising. So there's a lot of, we fundraised in order to be able to fundraise. So we pay folks to, including myself, to be able to do the grant writing, to build relationships and do the work of like finding pots of money to pour into this. Yeah. So, and that's work. And all of us do a little piece of it, and we get paid to do that.
Yeah. And do you think that like eventually if you envision even further in the future, you have these different little community land trusts which have their own little set of governance.
Yeah.
Will they have to then take some initiative to help do their own fundraising, or do you see that always being a part of the burden of like, no, I don't want to say burden, but
I know
like
what you mean.
The responsibility,
of the nonprofit.
Yeah.
I think that we're still deciding this. It's a great question, but I think right now what we've arrived at is that folks who are living here will be responsible for the maintenance of their home.
Yeah.
And that Khuba would be responsible for supporting
the rest of the infrastructure.
The infrastructure maintenance, and also potentially supporting the payment of taxes and things like that.
Right, okay.
And we're still figuring that out because I feel like that should also be shared, but we'll figure it out.
There's actually a book that was done in Community Land Trust that was out of actually Cornell University, believe it or not. I think the last time it was published, it was in the late 80s or whatever. So there are models out there. I think there was a CLT that was trying to develop in Buffalo, but I reached out to them, but I don't think it ever got off the ground or whatever. But this is really interesting to me because this is one of the models that we actually looked at as far as like, how do you structure it? And it's actually one of the models that we haven't featured yet. So it'll be interesting to kind of follow your journey and follow your path on how it actually kind of develops and what you say, nah, I want to push this off the table and we're going to adopt this. Because it's always a struggle to find out what is the best model for what you're trying to do.
Yeah. And we're still discovering that.
Yeah.
And I think Jay Smith, who's a part of our group,
whom I met, which is really delightful gentleman.
Yeah, he's amazing, has so much knowledge. And so he's been recommending that we make broader connections with other land trusts and other intentional communities and other eco-villages, just to kind of learn what they've done. Not that we have to imitate anybody specifically, but there's a lot that we can kind of glean. So we've been meeting with other folks to see what their process has been.
Yeah, great advice. You're building for a certain set of people now. What is the plan for when maybe their kids grow up? Do they inherit it? Like how does that kind of pass on from one to the other? Because they'd have to probably fulfill that kind of same spiritual, giving.
And the way that we're structuring the nonprofit, we're still kind of drafting what those documents will be looking like, but right now we don't want to control the future of like what this is, but also sort of highlight and make sure that people can understand what this was founded for, the purpose for which it was founded. But 99-year leases, ground leases to folks is the way that we're probably going to go with the new nonprofit for the folks that will live here, and then make some sort of succession plan that's built into that, that highlights those values, but also allows people who grew up here to still have agency in whether they want to continue forth.
Yeah, because that's one of the other issues is, just building generational wealth and making sure that somebody has a place to live afterwards, provided that they have the set of values. And just for folks also with the 99-year lease or 49-year lease, which we had found out from the area, not everybody has those kinds of things in their in the towns that they live in, but generally banks will still understand a 49 or 99-year lease. So if anybody actually did need to take a loan from the bank could still understand that and say, okay, you're doing a 49 or 99-year lease, we could actually provide you a mortgage to build your house. So sometimes when you're kind of doing these projects that seem so unusual to a bank or to a real estate group or anything like that, they're like, no, we don't want to touch it.
Right.
So you kind of still have to work within the system that you have.
Totally. And
while
also
being
not
creative.
sort of be of the system and sort of work that way, because
It's a hard
think about
compromise, yeah.
banks, and I don't believe in like loans, even though we have to live with them.
Yeah.
Like, what does default on a loan like that look like in a
Yeah.
community like this? Like,
Yes.
what does that look like, and
Yeah.
what are the implications of working with a bank? So yeah, we're thinking about all of those things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's really great for folks, even if you're not going like community land trust style and you're trying to do multiple people and you need a mortgage to build your house. That is an option,
Right.
or that is maybe something that you could talk about with a bank if you do need to go that route.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think the idea is people have choices, and it's not about us controlling those choices. It's about us building something that is sustainable for people, and also creating sort of a through line of success, so that people don't get encumbered with things unnecessarily that might be harmful.
Are you familiar with Soulfire Farm up in
Yeah.
Albany?
Oh,
Okay, so
yeah.
how are they structured? Because I feel like there's some similarity here to that.
Yeah, so that's one of the models that we look to for inspiration. And we're
Yeah.
not doing things identically. And Leah has definitely talked to us personally about how she thinks we were doing, and yeah, it's been really invaluable. And they have decided to go sort of the for-profit style and have, ownership of lands and businesses for
Like a joint
economic-
venture kind of thing?
Yes.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's a different model, but smart.
Similar outcomes at the end of the day.
Exactly.
Which just goes to show you there's more ways to like skin a cat, I guess.
Right. And I would say if you want, theirs is complex enough that I would say go to their website,
Yeah.
review their materials. They've been extremely transparent about how they've structured things and have created a model that people can study. So if people want to go to their website and learn more, and yeah, don't rely on my oversimplification, but dig a little bit deep, because they did the work on figuring that out.
Fantastic. I mean, I think this gives us so much to think about. I think it will be really helpful for folks, and to really give a lot of folks, something to chew on. I mean, especially nowadays with it's so hard to access land, no matter who you are, that it's just amazing to see that, folks like yourself are actually, charting new paths and new courses for people to have access to land, and then access to a sense of self and a sense of place as well.
Stay tuned here, because we'll be documenting more stories here in the beautiful Finger Lakes community of New York. Additionally, 10% of our Google AdSense revenue is reinvested into community-based projects here in the Finger Lakes, which is matched by our partners over at Espoma Organic. So your like, subscribe, and overall support goes a long way. See you in the next film.